When you start learning full-stack web development, you'll probably go with Node.js and React because it is really convenient to build full-stack apps by just knowing JavaScript. But after a while, it can feel a bit repetitive, so you'd like to try out something new. And probably that's why you clicked to this video, where we will build a full-stack web app with React and Go, and we will implement all CRUD operations, which are create, read, update, and delete. And you will see the entire process because I will take you from an empty folder to the deployment. And just because this is the very first Go tutorial on the channel, I wanted to keep it simple and show the fundamentals. But depending on your feedback, I might want to build a little bit more complex projects with Go in the future. And today we will build a task app where we can create one, mark as completed, and delete that task. Just to make this as beginner friendly as possible, we will build the API twice. In the first one, we will store the data in memory, and then we will build it again by connecting to a database, which is gonna be MongoDB. And in the front end, we will use React with TypeScript. We will use TanStack, also known as React Query, for data fetching. We will use ChakraUI for styling, and at the end, we will deploy our app to Railway for free. So overall, a simple but yet effective tutorial to get you up and running with your very first Go application. I had a lot of fun while building it, so I hope you will like it too. And I would appreciate if you could leave a like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and let's get started. So before we start coding, if you visit the GitHub repo that you could find the link in the description, you will see this file called comparisons.md. So I know that most of you guys has the JavaScript background with Node.js, so I wanted to create this kind of like notes or cheat sheet that you could use before starting the tutorial or maybe after completing it. I think that would be kind of like a cool comparisons that we could do in the Go environment and Node.js. So in Node.js, when you start to create a new project, you would say npm init, which will give you a package.json file. And the equivalent of that, I'll just zoom in a little bit, in Go is going to be go mod init, and then you would put a module name. So this is going to be some kind of like unique identifier for your module, and it is going to create a go.mod file in the current directory. And again, this is going to be that kind of like package.json file which contains information about the module, its dependencies, and the Go version that you're using. And this module name has like, it could be anything, but it has a convention, and we'll see that in a couple of minutes. And then when you want to start your application in Node.js, you would basically run this kind of like a command, which is npm run start, and in Go you would say go run and then the file name, which is going to compile the program and executes it. And then when you want to install a package, you would say npm install and then package name in Node.js, and in Go you would say go get and then the package name. So GoGet is not a package manager, but it is used to download and install packages from remote repositories, and it does not handle versioning, and this command fetches the package and its dependencies if there are any. And then, as we just talked about it before, package.json, the equivalent of that would be go.mod file, which contains the information about the module, its dependencies, and then the Go version. So when you want to install all dependencies in a project, you would say npm install, and in Go that's going to be go mod tidy. And then when you want to stringify JSON, so you would call this method, and in Go this is called something like marshalling. So you would say json.marshal, and you're gonna have so like the Go data structure, and when you just marshal that, it's going to stringify it to a JSON string. And the reverse operation is going to be json.parse, which is going to be unmarshalling. So again, you have a JSON string, and you're going to run this method with that, and it's going to give you that Go data structure in JSON, right? Now this code might look a little bit complicated, but we'll get to that. And then the nodman is something that just reloads your application whenever you change some source file, right? That's going to be in the Node.js. And in Go there is air, which is a live reload tool, just like nodman, but in Go applications. So it's going to watch for file changes and automatically rebuild and restart the application. It is similar to nodman, and there are other alternatives like fresh, but for my case, air was the most convenient one to use it. And to be able to configure it, you need to have a file called air.toml, and this is something that, again, we'll just get into that in the video. And so to be able to store your environment variables, you would install the .env package in Node. And in Go, it is going to be this go get and then the module name. So github.com, Jaho, and then go.env. And again, this is going to allow us to store sensitive information like API keys, database URIs, and any kind of like secret. And here is an example of that where we just you say go.env.load the env file, and if there are any errors, just console log it to the console, right, or in the terminal. But if we just pass that, now we could just get any environment that we have, and we're going to just assign it to a variable. Now we would use Express.js in Node to be able to have that web framework, and in Go it is going to be Fiber, which is a web framework for Go, and it is inspired by Express.js. So it is fast, lightweight, and easy to use, and you're going to see it is actually looking pretty similar to Express. And there are other alternatives such as Gin and Eco, and if you wanted to, you could take a look at them after completing this video. Then let's see a middleware. So in Express.js, we had middlewares, right? This is actually a concept that we have almost in any kind of programming language when you build an API or something similar. And in Go, here is how we would use it. So we create an app just like in Express, but we say fiber.new, which is going to give us an instance. Then we would mount the middleware to our function, and that middleware is going to take the next as the first argument, and once we have run the middleware logic, it's going to call the next function. So that's going to be the middleware, and then we have route handling, and here is an example, the equivalent of that in Go. So you would mount your route and your handler or the controller function, and that's going to take the context, and you could just send a response, and we'll be using that in the video as well. So that's going to be my comparisons. I think that's a pretty cool list, which is about 200 lines of code that you could use it after completing this video as well. And with that, let's go ahead and initialize a Go module. So here we'll just say go mod init and then the module name. So here is my empty folder that I have just created, and I'll open up a new terminal and I'll say go mod init, and then you could just put anything here, but the convention is to put your GitHub repo that you will push this into. So I'll say github.com and my username, then I'll just say React Go tutorial, and this is going to be the repo that I will create and push this code into. And if we just press enter, that's going to give us go.mod file. Here we can see this is the Go version that we are using, and this is the module name. And to be able to use Go, I forgot to mention, but you need to install Go in your machine, which is pretty simple. You would just go ahead and Google it, then just install it and just press a couple of next buttons, and it should be fine and up and running. So in Go, we have like packages and modules, and let's just see that on a diagram. So here is our note about packages and modules. So a package is a collection of Go source files that reside in the same directory. So here, let's see, this is, let's say, a package, right? And we have the main.go. So let's say that's going to be our main package. Then we have the handlers package, the API package, so on and so forth. And all of them coming together is going to form a module, right? So packages collectively form a module, and when you initialize a Go module, so basically you are creating a module, right? Because it's gonna have multiple different packages, and like it's gonna form a module. So the very first thing that we'd like to do is create a main.go file, and this is gonna be the main package. So we'll just say package main, and this idea is kind of like different if you have never used it, but once you just write a couple of different lines of code and use it more than, so let's say you would use it in a couple of different projects, that's going to just make a lot of sense. So here, this is going to be our main package, and in the main package, you have to have the main function. So here, Copilot is getting a bit annoying, so I'll just go ahead and disable completions. So here, I'll just have my main package, and I'll just, let's say, console log hello world. For that, we would use fmt. Let's import that, and I'll say fmt print line, just like this, and I'll say hello world. And to be able to run this file, I'll just say go run and main.go. Now we should be able to see hello world in our console. And let's see the variables in Go. So I'll just shrink my terminal. Now there are a couple of ways of creating variables. So with the var, we have, let's say, my name, and type is going to be string. So I'll just say John Doe. And there is another usage with const. We'll say my second name. That's going to be string, and we'll just say Jane Doe. So this is not going to be a Go complete crash course, but I just wanted to talk about variables for a second, because there is another way of using that, which is pretty common, where you don't really declare the type, but that's going to be inferred. So I'll just say my third name, and if I just put this colon and equal sign, I could just say, let's say Bob Doe. So here, this type is going to be string by default because it is being inferred, and I'll be using this kind of variable assignment a lot in this video. And if you just say fmt.print line my name, let's say duplicate this one twice, let's say my second name and my third name, we should be able to see all of them in the console. Let's go ahead and run this file with go run main.go. And there we go, we have all of them in the console. So that's going to be the variables, and just keep in mind that this is going to infer the type. I think I could delete all of them, and here we'd like to install the Fiber so that we could create our API and just have our web framework, right? So I'll open up my terminal and I'll just say CLS to clear up my console or my terminal, and I'll just say go get. So let's get the Fiber. So I'll say github.com go fiber/fiber, and then I think it's gonna be v2. Now that's gonna get that and update our go.mod file. So there we go, we have all of our changes, and even we got the go.sum file, and it's gonna be again related to packages or modules. And let's create our app. So I'll say just like this, it's going to infer the type. I'll say fiber.new, and we'll like to say app.listen, and now you would put column and then let's say the port, which I'll go with 4000, and that should be capitalized. And if we have any errors, we could just wrap this with, let's say, log and import the package and fatal. So with that, we should be able to see any so if you hover over this, it's gonna say fatal is equivalent to print followed by a call to OS exit 1, which means there were some errors. But if we don't have any, I think that's gonna work fine. Let's go ahead and run our server, right? I'll say go run main.go, and we should be able to see the hello world, and now it is listening on our, let's see, this port. And here we are getting this kind of like security kind of thing. I'll just say accept the, so just let me use the go. So now whenever I change anything in this file, so let's say hello world s, it is not going to restart my server. To be able to see that change, I need to kill it and then just restart it again. So now I could see it just has the new update and like the thing in the console, but I don't really want to have this. I just want to have that kind of like node mom feeling where it's just going to restart that as soon as I change anything in this file. And for that, I'll just go ahead and kill my terminal, clear that, and install a package called air. So I'll say go install and then this github.com, and just paste it and press enter. And once you have done that, it's going to install air, where we need to create a file for the configuration. So go into this like file explorer and just create air.toml. And to be able to get this kind of like formatting, install this extension in VS Code. So it is this one that I'm using to be able to get this kind of like the formatting that you'll see in a second. Now this is a file that I have prepared with the help of ChatGPT and taking a look at from the Stack Overflow, and I put some comments for your convenience. So here we just say the root file is going to be this current directory of the project, and the temp directory that you'd like to store your files is going to be temp, which is going to be created whenever we run the air command. And here are some build configurations. So we're just saying include any Go file, just watch that changes, and exclude anything in the client and in the temp. And we don't have the client, but we'll create that when we add our React application. And here we have a couple of different commands that you could take a look. So it is not really important, and let's kill it. I will go ahead and just say air, and here we can see it has been created, and now it listens for our server. So now anytime I just do some change, it is going to actually restart it because it says main.go has changed. So it's gonna build and it's gonna run that. Here we can see the updated result. So we don't really need to kill it and then just restart it again. Now let's go ahead and add our first route. So here I'll just say app.get. In the root route, we would like to call our handler function. So I'll say func, which is going to take the context, and you would like to call it as C. This is the convention, and that's going to be fiber.context, but that's going to be a pointer into that. So I'll explain the pointers in a couple of minutes. Most of you guys know how that works, but in case so like some of you don't know, I'll just try to explain it pretty quickly. And we'll just say we might want to return some errors, so we're gonna put that, and we'll say return, let's say c.status of 200, and we'll just say, let's see, this is not correct. Okay, c.status 200, and the JSON data we would like to send, let's say fiber.map, and we'll just say message is gonna be, let's say hello world. And to be able to test it out, let's go ahead and install this Postman extension. Feel free to get that. I think it should be this one. Okay, instead of using this desktop application, we're going to use it directly in the VS Code. I'll just zoom out a little bit, and I have a workspace called React Go Tutorial, and I would like to add a new collection. I'll just say todos, and I'll just create let's say add a request. That's going to be a get request, and I'll just say maybe get todos. For now, let's call it like that. And our endpoint is going to be HTTP localhost, and our port is 4000, and we would like to just send a request to the root route. And if I just send that now, it's going to say hello world, because this is what we are sending. So now that we have this kind of like boilerplate setup where we have our application, we are listening on this port, and we are just having this kind of like handler function, I think we are ready to go and build our the first part, right? So we're gonna store to-dos in the memory. That's gonna be the first part, and then in the second one, we're gonna actually connect to MongoDB. So here we're gonna have a couple of different to-dos, and for that we could use struct in Go, and which is going to allow us to have custom kind of like data structure where we could give different fields with different data types. So I'll say type, which is going to be to do, and I'll say that's going to be a struct, and open up this curly braces. So each to do will have an ID. Let's say the type is going to be int, that should be a lowercase, and we'll say completed field it's going to have, which is going to be bool or boolean, and we'll say it's going to have a body, and which is going to be type of string. And in the JSON body, we would like to just rename them. I'll just say JSON and open up this quotes, and I'll say ID, and I'll do the same thing for this one, backticks JSON, and that's going to be, let's say backticks completed, and this is going to be the value that you'll actually see in the response. So JSON body, and that's how I would like to call it. So I'll just save to get this formatting. And now in the main function, we would like to have the to-dos array. So I'll say to-dos and assign it to, let's say just like this. I'll say it's gonna be to-do, but an array of it, right? So just like that. And the very first thing that we would like to do is actually create a to-do. So I'll say app.post. So that's going to be our post method, and our endpoint is going to be API/todos. We would like to have this function, which is going to take the C, and it's going to be pointer to the fiber.context, and this function might return errors. So we're just gonna put that error and just have our function body. So we're gonna have a to-do, right? Let's just say to-do is gonna be equal to this to-do struct that we'll have. Now this is gonna give us, since we didn't pass any value into it, it's gonna actually create it with the false values or the default values. And for int, it's gonna be 0. For boolean, that's gonna be false. And for string, it's gonna be an empty string. So here, just imagine now this to-do is equal to, let me just put it in the same line. So the ID is 0, completed is gonna be false, and the body is gonna be an empty string. But this body or this object is gonna be coming from the user, right? It's gonna be coming from the request. And for that, we can check for it and assign it to assign that into this to-do. So I'll just say c.body parser, and we're gonna pass the to-do. So if you take a look at that, body parser binds the request body to a struct. So it's gonna take the whatever user sends from the request and assign it into this to-do. But now this should be a pointer. So we need to just say get the memory address of that, and this might return us a error. So I'll say if error, just assign it into that one, and just put this where we'll just check for error. So we'll say if error is not null, which is equivalent of null in JavaScript, and we'll just say return the error. So here this looks a little bit weird, where we create the error in the same line and just check for it. We are assigning the value and check for it, right? And then we'll say users can create the to-do, but what if body is an empty string? Then we'd like to return an error. So I'll say if to-do.body is equal to an empty string, then I'll just say return c.status of 400, and I'll say JSON, where I would like to say fiber.map, and I'll say error field is gonna be, let's say to-do body is required. Okay, but if this is not the case, we can increment the ID by 1 because it was 0 where we have the false values, right? So I'll say to-do.id is gonna be the length of to-dos plus 1, and we'll say now to-dos we'll like to append the current to-do that we have just created. So I'll say append, call this method, and we'll say into the to-dos add the new to-do. And since this is the memory address, we'll like to get the value out of it, right? That was the pointer. And eventually we'll say return c.status of 201, which means a resource has been created, and we'll say JSON of to-do. So now let's save, test it out, and then I'll explain this kind of like pointers. And I will duplicate this request, and I'll say create a to-do. That's going to be post request. I will save that, and our endpoint was /API/todos, where we'd like to send the to-do body. So let's go into the raw JSON, and if we don't pass anything, that should say okay, this is giving us an error. Let's see what is the problem. Maybe opening up our console. So I'll just, I think, save that one and send it again. Okay, I'll just say body is gonna be hello world. Okay, it says now it's been created, but if we don't pass anything, it's gonna say to-do body is required. And that means our endpoint is actually working. We sent a request to there, and this function run where we check for the errors and eventually either return the response or the error. And now let's take a look at these pointers. So here, let me just explain that here, and then I'll just show that in a diagram. So let's say I have a variable, maybe I'll just zoom in a little bit. So here, let's say I have a variable called x, which is type of int, and let's say the value is 5. And then this is going to be stored in a memory address, right? So let's say it's going to be 0x000 and maybe 1. So this is the memory address of x, and the value of it is 5. And let's say I'll have a pointer now, and that's going to be int. And just to make sure that this is a pointer, we need to put this asterisk before that int, and I'll say this is the pointer that points to the memory address of x. So that's basically it. This is the memory address of x. So the value of p is now actually the memory address of x. Okay, so this is the value that p stores, and the value x stores is 5. So if you just say now fmt print line of p, then you're gonna actually get this value. And if you say p, but the address that it, the value that it stores, it is gonna give you the value of x, which is gonna be 5. So I hope you're able to see how that works. P stores the memory address of x, and when you ask it like that, it's gonna tell the compiler to give the value that has been stored on this address. So that was kind of like so strange idea if you're seeing this for the first time, the pointers. So we have a memory, and let's just see that on a diagram. So we have just created a variable called, let's say, x. The value was 5, and let's say this has been stored on this address. Okay, so this is x, the value of 5, and then we have created a p, which is pointer, and it is gonna point to the, so it's gonna point to the x. So here we have the p. For the value, it is gonna get the memory address of x. Let me just mark it like that, and there you go. Now if you say, hey p, give me the value of this address that you are storing, then you would just say asterisks, so asterisk and p, which is gonna give you the value that has been stored in this address, which is gonna be 5. And here, this is the kind of like what I've explained, and here we got the memory address of that to do, and we're getting the value out of it. And this is how it works in Go. So kind of like strange, but once you're used to it, it gets it just makes a lot of sense. And so we have created the to-do endpoint. So I'll say create a to-do, and let's try to update a to-do. I will delete this line, and below that I'll just say update a to-do. So for updating, we could use the put method, but I think I'll go with patch. So it's just preference. Feel free to use the one that you'd like to use, and I'll give the endpoint of /API /todos / the ID of to-do that we'd like to update. So that's gonna take the handler function context. So let's say fiber.context, and we could return an error, and we'll just get the first ID from the params. So I'll say ID is equal to c.params, and our params is called as ID. Now this is going to be type of string, right? So this is something important to keep in mind, and we're going to first for loop our to-dos that we are storing. So I'll say for I, this is going to be the index, and then the to-do itself, where you would like to say range to-dos, and this is how we would run a for loop in Go, and Go doesn't have while loops, so you need to write them in for loop if you need any. And here we'll just go ahead and say if to-do dot ID is equal to the ID that we have in the params. But now this is going to give you an error, because this is the type of int that you are storing, right? And this is the type of string. And to be able to make that work, we can convert this to-do ID to be a string. And I'll just say fmt dot sprint to-do dot ID. Okay, with that should be fine. and we'll just say todos I, so it's gonna find that. In the completed field, we're gonna just make that to be true. So if you want to negate it, so you would say just get the current value. So I'll say todos I completed. So it's gonna either make it true. So if it is true, it's gonna be false, but if it is false, it's gonna be true. But in this case, I just want to always make it true when I send in request to this endpoint. And once this is done, I'll say return c.status. Let's go with this one, 200, and we could just return the updated to do. So I'll say todos and the index. But if this is not really the case, we're gonna say to do is not found. So return c.status of 404, and let me just scroll a little bit. And I'll say send maybe just a JSON fiber.map. So to do not found. Let's go ahead and test it out. I'll create another one. I'll duplicate this, and that's gonna be patch. So API to-dos, and let's say you'd like to update the first to-do that we have created. And by the way, let's create a couple of different. So I'll just say learn React, send it. So it is not completed. So let's say learn JavaScript, learn Python, and let's say learn Go. And here you can see ID is just incremented by 1. So we're gonna go here, and we don't really need to pass any body. So if you just save that, it's going to update this method name. And if I just say update the first to do, it is gonna make it to be completed. So there you go. It is learn React, where we have the completed field to be true. And by the way, whenever you kill your server terminal, it is going to actually delete every to do that you have, because it is storing that in memory. So this is something to keep in mind when you're working with in-memory kind of like approach. So okay, I think that's gonna be it for the update a to-do endpoint. Let's go ahead and create the delete one. So I'll say delete a to-do, and that should be our very last endpoint. So I'll just save that first and scroll a little bit. It's gonna be app.delete our endpoint /API/todos, and then / the ID, so that we could know which to do that we're deleting. And also, I think I forgot to update this one, which is going to be to be able to get all to-dos. So that's going to be /API/todos, and let's go ahead and update that one. So here we had the root route, and I'll just make that to be /API/todos, which is going to just return to-dos that we had, right? If we save, and if we just send a request to that, let's just see, send it again because it was restarting. Okay, let's see, what is the problem? So it says missing handler in route. I think we forgot to, let's just comment this out. Since we don't have the handler function, it just throws us an error. So I'll just save that, and in the get to-dos, we should be able to get send this request, and we cannot get anything. Let's just send it again. Okay, there we go. Server just started, and it says hello world, but we don't really want to get that. So if we hit /API/todos, okay, looks like it is not really working. I'll just go ahead, kill the terminal, clear my console, and I'll just say error. And if we just test it out again, so for some reason there were some kind of like caching problem, so I just killed all of them, right? And then I open up like get to-dos, and now if I just send a request, there we can see we don't have any to-dos in the response. So I don't know why did we got that kind of like caching, but here you can see this is the exact same code that we have just written. So let's go ahead and try to add this delete to-do handler. And again, this is going to be pretty similar. So we'd like to have this kind of like handler function, which is going to be the pointer to the fiber.context. You might want to return an error out of this function, and we're going to get the ID from the prems. So I'll say c dot prems, which is going to be the ID in this case that we that's how we have called it. Then we're going to say for I, the index, and then the to do in range of to-dos. So we're gonna find the to-do that we would like to delete. So I'll say if to-do dot id is equal to id, and again we're gonna get that error because this is the type of integer. That's how we have created in the struct, and we need to and this is the type of string, so we can't really compare a string to a number. So we need to convert this to be a type of string as well, just like we have done previously. So I'll just say fmt.sprint and just wrap the to-do ID with that. And if this is the case, we'll just say to-dos and we're gonna just reassign it. So I'll say append into the to-dos up until this index that we are trying to delete but not including. And we're gonna say to-dos, just add these values, so I plus 1 and up until the end, and we need to put this 3 dots, which is going to just unpack those values. So let's say if you didn't understand this code, let me just show an example. Let's say we had 5 different to-dos. Okay, and we have just wanted to delete the third one. This is gonna say that just take the first 2 values, right, up until the index but not included. So we wanted to delete this one. It is gonna take all of them but not this one included. So now we're gonna have 1 and 2, not the 3, and from I plus 1, so starting from here up until the end. So we're gonna have 4 and 5. There you go, we have deleted the third one, and this is the new to-do list that we have. So I hope that makes sense, and this is something called variadic operator, and it is kind of like this spread operator in JavaScript where you just unpack the values. And we'll just say return c dot status, and let me just actually copy that line and paste it because it is pretty similar with the status code, and success is going to be true. And if this is not really the case, we couldn't find anything, so we'll just say return 404 JSON fiber.map to do not found. Let's go ahead and test that out. So I'll just go ahead and maybe add a new request. That's going to be the last one, and I'll just make this type of delete, save that, and I'll say delete a to do. Okay, I'm gonna save that and I'll say this is gonna be my endpoint /API /to-dos and then the ID of the to-do. First, if we try to get all to-dos, we don't have anything in the memory, so let's go ahead and create one. So I'll just say learn Go, and let's create 2 different one. So I'll say learn React, and let's say learn Python. Okay, so we have created 3 different to-dos. If we want to get all of them, here you can see we have 3 different items, and I would like to just delete the learn React. So I'm gonna put the ID of 2. There we go, it says success true, and if we want to get all of them, here we can see the ID of 2 has been deleted. So with that, I think that's gonna be it for the first part of the course, where we have just created 4 different endpoints to be able to get to-dos, create a to-do, update one, and just delete one. And we are listening on a port, so everything works fine. And next, we would like to actually write this same thing but with MongoDB, where we could have a database and just store those values. So when we kill our terminal or when we kill our server, we don't really lose them because that they are not going to be stored in the memory. And before we get into that, let's just see how we could use .env in this Go application. So the very first thing that we need to do, just maybe kill this terminal and just say cls to be able to clear that. And I'll say go get github.com/ I think it is called as Joho, and then we'll say go.env. And if we press enter, that should get us that module, and we would like to load environment variables. And for that, let's go ahead and create this .env file. And I'm not sure if you have realized, but we have this temporary, so kind of like the folder where the air is going to create whenever you run this air command. So it's gonna, depending on your changes, it's gonna store its files in this temp directory, which is going to be the executable of the compiled code. So in the .env, let's say I have my port as, let's say, 5000, and let's delete this spaces. And instead of using this kind of like hard-coded value, I could just use that port. So the very first thing that I wanted to do is just scroll to the very top, and I'll just say error and just assign it like this. I'll say go.env.load the .env file, and if error is not null, which means there is an error, right, we need to catch it and just say log.fatal, and let's say error loading .env file. But if this is not the case, I'll just put this port variable and assign it to OS. Let's import that. Make sure you have imported all of those modules and packages. So we'll just say os.getEnv, and we have called it as port, right? And now we could use this value actually in here. So I'm gonna delete that, and I'll say plus port. So we have called it as 5000, right? Let's see if that's gonna work or not. I'll just clear my terminal, and I'll just say error. And there we go. Now I can see the hello world, and I can see my server just started on this port, which is 5000, right? Okay, so that's gonna be it for this very first section. Let's just initialize this as a Git repo and commit our changes. For those of you that want to see in the commit history, the first version that we have created completely in the memory, and next we're gonna build it with MongoDB. So I'll go ahead and maybe just kill this terminal. I'll just say clear that, git init, initialized an empty git repository. Let's create a git ignore file. So I'll say .git ignore, and the content that you could just grab that from the GitHub repo. So this is something that I just wanted to paste instead of writing it from scratch. Okay, so here we're just excluding the compiled binary files, macOS specific files, .env, not modules, and all these files that are not really important to be tracked by Git. So if you save that, here you can see this has been ignored. This file should be ignored, and yeah. So let's go ahead and add all of them to the staging area, and I think I'll just give the first commit as first section completed, store in memory. So I'll just commit those changes, and I'll see you in the next section. Okay, so in this section, we're gonna build this exact same API again, but this time using MongoDB so that we could see how we can interact with a database. So the very first thing that we would like to do is just visit mongodb.com and create an account for free, and then just log in. And once you log in, it should take you to this dashboard where you can create an organization and then create a project. So I'll just say create a new project, and then I'll just give a project a name. So I'll just say go, maybe React Go tutorial, and I'll just say next. Project owner is gonna be me, so I'll just say create the project, and then I'll just create a deployment. And I would like to use the free tier, which is enough for our side project, and cluster name could be just default, and let's say create the deployment. And here we can see the username and password. So you would like to copy this and don't lose it. So I'll go ahead and just paste it in the env file for a second, and we're going to be using that. So I'll just say create the database user. And once we have done that, it's going to say choose a connection method. So here on the screen, there is my IP address. You can't really see it because I hide it while editing this video, but you should be able to see your IP address, and it is going to add that to enable local connectivity. And let's say choose a connection method. We would like to connect to, let's say, from our application. So I'll just go ahead and copy this string and then just paste it to here, and I'm gonna give or maybe I'm just gonna assign it to this variable. I'll say MongoDB underscore URI. Okay, there we go. And here there is my password, so I don't really need this one. I can delete that. And with the help of this environment variable, we're able to connect to our MongoDB database. So this is our connection string. And once you have done that, let's say review setup steps, and let's say this is done. So now you don't really want to get some development errors. So just go ahead and just go into the network access, and here you can see there's going to be your current IP address, but let's just add the IP address where we could just access from anywhere. So I'll just click this one, which is going to be this IP address, and I'll say confirm. And it is in the pending state. In a couple of seconds that should be active. Okay, there we go. Now it is active and we can visit our database. And currently we shouldn't really have any collections. But in this case we have one, and this is something MongoDB gives you out of the box so that you could do some testing. But in this case, I'll just go ahead and delete that. And currently I don't have any databases or any collections, but we'll create in a second. So we'll like to interact with our MongoDB database, right? So we need to use the MongoDB driver. So I'll say go get, and I'll just put that as lowercase. So go get go.mongodb.org/mongo-driver, and I think /mongo. So just type this and press enter. That's gonna get you the Mongo driver so that you could interact with your database. So I think I'll just delete this file completely, except from this type. I'll just cut that and select everything and just delete it. Okay, I'll say package main, and I'll say func main, and I'll just say fmt print line, where I could just see the hello world in the console. And then I'll just paste my struct at the very top. Now this is going to be exactly the same, but we'd like to add one more field, which is going to be bson for the ID, and we're going to say _ID and just leave it like that for now. And we need to add this field because MongoDB store its data in the format of bson, which is also known as binary JSON. And this is the data format that MongoDB uses. So this is something I think required that you need to pass. And then let's say var collection, where that's going to be a pointer to the mongo.collection, and make sure you import this package. And now we'd like to actually load the environment .env file, and let's just say that. So error, we'll just say go.env.load.env, and if there is an error, so if it is not null, then log.fatal. Let's import the log. So here we'll just say error loading.env file, and we could even put the error message. And then we'd like to have that MongoDB URI environment variable, and we'd like to just grab it from our .env file, right? So I'll just say os dot, let's import the os, and get env, and let's see what we have called it. It was MongoDB _ URI, and I'm gonna take this value and just assign it to a variable. So I'll just leave it like that, and I would like to be the type to be inferred, which is gonna be type of string. And then we'd like to connect to MongoDB. So we're gonna say client options. This is gonna be our variable. So I'll say options, and we need to import that as well from Mongo options dot client, and then we'll say apply URI, where we'd like to pass our MongoDB connection string. And then we're gonna get the client and error out of this call. And again, let's invert the type. I'll say mongo.connect, and now this want you to, if you just hover over that, this want you to pass this context, right? So I'll just say context dot background. So this is not scope of this video, and this is basically something that you would like to create when you want to have maybe some cancellations, some timeouts. But in our case, we don't really want to have it. We just say, so it is like saying I am starting this task, but I don't have any special requirements or deadlines attached to it. Okay, so that's gonna be the information about context. This is just something that we need to pass. You could ignore it for now, and we're gonna get the client options. And again, we'll say if error is not null, so error is not null, and let me just scroll a little bit. if it is not equal to nil, we're just gonna say, let's say log.fatal, the error itself. And then we can just check the connection with the ping method. So I'll say again an error, I'll say client.ping, and again this want you to pass a context, so I'll say context.background, and make sure you have imported this context package, right? Then here I'll just put the second variable as nil, which is read pref, and we don't really need to pass it. And let's see, why do we have this error? Okay, if we just delete that, that should be fine. And we'll say if again error is not nil, let's just do the same thing just like this, but otherwise we'll just say fmt.println connected to MongoDB Atlas. So just like that, and let's save this and just test it out. I'll just clear my console and I'll say error. So it just run that, it says hello world, and then it connected to MongoDB Atlas with the help of this methods and this kind of code block that we have just written. And now we would like to have a database and then a collection. So for that, for my database, I'll just go before this question mark and I'll just call it as golang_db. And this is going to be the database that I would like to connect to. So here I'll just go ahead and say collection client.database. Oops, it should be database like this. So it just auto completes my code, but I think if we delete this part, it should be fine. Just leave it like that. Client.database, we will have the golang_db in our collection. I would like to just call it as todos. So I'll just store all of my todos in this collection, and I'll say app again, just create a fiber.new, and then we're gonna have 4 different endpoints. So I'll say app.get, right, which is gonna be /API/todos, and instead of putting the function immediately here, we could just make our code a little bit more kind of concise or maybe clean. Let's say get todos, and I'll just duplicate this, I think 3 more times. This one is going to be to be able to create a to-do, so I'll just say app.post, and this is going to be, let's say, patch, to be able to update one, and this is going to be delete. And here in the last 2 one, we would like to add an ID so that we could know which to-do we are deleting or updating. So we have get to-dos, and let's say create to-do, and this handler function is going to be update to-do, and lastly delete to-do. Then again, we could just get that kind of port from the .env file, and this is something that we have done previously, so I'll just copy it and paste it. And now we could just check if port is empty, then we could put a default value. So I think I'll just go with the 5000, and because that's what we are using. And eventually we're gonna just say listen to that port, and if there are any errors, just wrap it with log.fatal. And now let's go ahead and create all those functions or handlers. So I'll say func. The first one is gonna be get todos, which is gonna take the context, say fiber.context, which can return us an error, and just get the function. And let's just duplicate that 3 more times. The first one is going to be create to do, update to do, and then let's say delete to do. And let's comment all this out and just implement them one by one. First, let's start with this one. So here I'll just scroll down a little bit, and we're gonna have var to-dos, and that's going to be an array of to-do, let's say, and we're going to just fetch that and maybe assign it to that, or just append to that to-do, right? So that should be uppercase to-do because that's what we have called our struct. So we're going to say collection.find, and we're going to say, again, we need to pass the context. So I'll just say context.background, and the second option is going to be bson.m. So this might look a little bit complicated, but basically we are trying to pass our filters. In our case, that's going to be no filters because we would like to fetch all to-dos in our collection. So if you want to pass some filters, then you would put something into this object, but in our case, we don't really want to. And we would like to just fetch all documents in that collection. And this is going to give us, let's just assign it to the variables. We're going to have the cursor and then the error. So error is going to be whatever that is, but the cursor is something when you execute a query in MongoDB, it returns a cursor, and which is essentially a pointer to the result set. So you can use this cursor to iterate over the documents returned by the query. So just think of it like we have all of our to-dos. And let's just say if error is not nil, right? So we have an error, then just return that. But else we'll just say for, just map through it. So cursor dot next, and again we need to pass that context. So I'll just say context dot background, and for each to do we're gonna create this variable. Let's say to do, and we'll just say if there is an error, first we need to decode that, right? So I'm just gonna assign it to that error, and I'll say cursor dot decode, where we need to just put this to do, and if error is not nil, then we're gonna just return the error itself. But if this is not the case, then we're gonna just append this to do into that to-dos, right? I'll say append into the to-dos to this to-do that we have just get from the cursor, and eventually once we have get all of them, we're just gonna say return c.json, just pass the to-dos. Okay, so with that, that should be completed for this function. But now there is one optimization that we could use. So we have just created some kind of connection, right? We are fetching something, and at the end of the day, we'll like to just close that cursor when this function done, right? So I'll just say defer, which is a keyword that we use in Go to postpone the execution of a function call until the surrounding function completes. In this case, this is the surrounding function, right? Once this completes, it's gonna run the right hand side. So we'll just say cursor dot close, where we'll just say context dot background. Okay, so again, defer is a keyword that you use to postpone the execution of a function until the surrounding one ends or that completes. And that was that kind of like the optimization. And we could do the same thing here when we create a connection to our database. So here, I think after this mongo.connect, we could just say, maybe after the error, I'll just say defer client dot disconnect, not database, let's say disconnect, and again just pass the context dot background. So when this main function done with executing, right, we'll like to disconnect from that database from the client. So with that in mind, let's save this and try to test it out in the Postman, where we would like to get all of our to-dos, and now our localhost port is going to be 5000 because this is what we have put here, right? I'll just save that, and if we take a look, it is up and running. Let's just send a request. So we got null because we don't really have anything in the database. So next, let's go ahead and add the create to do endpoint. So I'll just uncomment this and create this function, maybe shrink this one and just uncomment this one, right? So here we would like to again create a to do. So I'll just say to do, and that's going to be equal to a new to do. So again, this is going to be a pointer. So just to keep that in mind, because we will use c.body parser. So I'll say c.body parser. There I can see that. And I'll just say pass it to do into it. And again, just remember that this is going to bind the request body to a struct. In this case, this is going to be that struct. We're going to take the request body and pass that into that struct. And here we will just say if this is going to return us an error. So we'd like to just assign that. And we'll say if error is not is not nil, right? I'll just say, then just show the, maybe return the error itself. And again, we're gonna just check if body is empty or not. So user can't really create a to-do by putting nothing. So I'll just paste it. Here we just say to-do.body. If it is an empty string, then just say to-do body cannot be empty. And then we'd like to insert into the MongoDB, right? If we just pass all of those if checks. So I'll just say collection dot insert one, which is gonna take the context dot background as the first argument, and then the item that you'd like to insert, which is gonna be this to do. And that's gonna give us, let's say, give a bit spacing, it's gonna give the insert result as well as the error. So here I'll just move on to the next line, and I'll say if there is an error, and just return it. But otherwise, let's just move on with the function, where we'd like to just update the to-do ID, right? Because when we created this to-do, that's gonna have a falsy value. And as I have explained previously, the ID is type of int, so it's gonna be 0, right? ID is gonna be 0, completed is type of boolean, by default that's gonna be the false, and the body is type of string, that's gonna be an empty string. But now that we have created that and inserted, now we have the inserted result. So we'd like to just update the to-do ID with the inserted ID. So I know that sounds a little bit complicated, but here we'll just see in a second. Insert result dot inserted ID, and which is type of primitive. Let's just do this type assertion, right? So primitive, and just import it from this Mongo driver dot object ID. And I think we forgot to use this one when we initialize this to-do struct. So here we have this ID. It is not going to be type of int because MongoDB has its own ID type, and we'll just say that's going to be primitive.object ID. Okay, we just remember that. And if we take a look at here, we need to add the error, and otherwise everything should be fine. So we have just updated that, and let's say return c.status of 201, a resource has been created, and JSON just return that to do. Now there is an issue here where when we just create a to do, right? So that should have an ID, and by default that's going to be 0. So we'll just say if it is 0, then just omit that value. Here I'll just say omit empty, and I'm gonna pass that to here as well. And now this basically says if the value is false, then just don't add it to the response, okay? Or let's just delete that and see what's gonna happen if we don't really add those fields. So we have our create to do function is up and running, right? Let's go ahead and test it out, where all I have to do is just update the port number because we have updated it. And for the body, let's say learn Python, and let's send the request. Now it says this has been created. Let's double check. If we just refresh our database, we should be able to see this golang db and then the to-dos collection. But here we can see the object ID is a value of 0 because that was the default value that it's gonna give, right? This is the falsy value, and we're gonna say if it is empty, then just omit that value and don't put it. And that's what we're gonna do. Basically, we'll say omit empty, and now I hope you're able to see what this does. If it is empty, then just omit that. Let's go ahead and first delete this document. Now we don't have anything in our database, and let's create that again. And the only change is going to be this ID. It is not going to be 0, but it's going to be created by MongoDB, right? It's going to be a default value. Let's say learn Go, and let's say learn React. And if we now try to get to-dos, instead of getting null, we should have this array of objects, which we have 3 different to-dos, and all of them are not completed. It's because that's the default value, but we're going to fix that next. So let's go ahead and update a to-do. First, shrink this function, get to-dos, create to-dos, and then add this endpoint where we have the update to-do function. So here in this function, again, we would like to take the ID from the c.params, which is going to be the ID, and that's going to be type of string, and we need to convert it to be type of object ID. So I will say that primitive dot object ID from hex, and we're going to pass the string ID, which is going to give us, let's say, the error as well as the object ID. So I'll just keep this as object ID and then the error. Okay, so we need to do this conversion, otherwise we can't really compare it. So from this string, we just made it a object ID that is type of primitive, which is what MongoDB uses, right? So we'll say if error is not nil, which means there is an error. So here I'll just put it like that. And I think I'll just say invalid to do ID. So I'll just paste this line where we just sent 400 error status. And then here we just want to update a to do. So I'll just say collection dot update one, where we would like to first pass the context dot background. That was the default argument. Then we would like to add our filter, right? So which one that we would like to update, and then which field that we're going to update. So these are the two things that we need to create. And if you remember, to be able to create a filter, we would use bson.m. And if you just leave it empty, that's gonna just say all documents, right? But we want to just get the one that has the ID of this object ID that we are getting from the params. And the update field, we would like to just update the completed field to be true. So I'll say bson.m, and here we'll just say set to be able to update, and we'll say again bson.m, and the completed field is going to be equal to true. So this looks like kind of like Mongoose if you have ever used it. And if this looks a little bit complicated, it is just the syntax that you need to get used to it. And this is going to return us the, let's say, like underscore, because we're not going to use that, and it's going to return us an error, and just assign it to that values. And we'll say if error is not nil, again just return that. So I'll just say if error is not nil, return it. But otherwise we're gonna just return a success status with 200, just like that. So I'm just gonna save that and just test it out. Also, let's close these, maybe save this one. So it was this, and let's rename this, because that's going to be update a to do. If we got all to dos, we know that the first one is Python, which is not completed. I'll copy the ID of it, and I would like to update it. And here I need to update the port. So I'll say update this one to be completed. If I just sent that, here you can see it says success. And let's get all of our to-dos. This should be true now. There we go. If we just check it in our database, it should be working fine for the first one, which is completed. And the very last thing that we need to add is to be able to delete a to-do, right? That's going to be our very last endpoint. So let's close all of them and uncomment this function, shrink this one. Oops. So shrink this one actually, and uncomment this line. So here again, we're gonna get the ID just like we have done previously from the params. So c.params, oops, what is going on? Okay, I'll just do Control Z. I think it imported something, and I just did Control Z. Okay, so here c.params, we would like to get the ID, and then again we would like to convert that object ID from hex. So we'll say object ID, and then the error field, it should be like this. So primitive dot object ID from hex, and then we're gonna pass the ID. So from the string we got the object ID of primitive type, and we'll say if error is not nil, then just say return c.status of 400, and then maybe JSON, and let's say fiber.map. We could say error where the ID is invalid. So invalid to do ID. But if this is not really the case, then we would like to just delete one from our collection. So we'll say collection, delete one, and again, context dot background, just like this. And then we'll like to pass our filter. So let's go ahead and create that. So I'll say filter is going to be equal to bson.m, and our ID is equal to this object ID. Oops, if I can type correctly, right? And again, this is gonna return us two different values, which is gonna be something that we don't use and then the error itself. And let's say if there is an error, then we'd like to just maybe return it. So if error is not null, then just return that. But else we'll just say success is gonna be true. In this case, I'll just copy that line and paste it with 200 status code. Okay, let's go ahead and test that one as well. So that's going to be our port 5000. And then the ID that we'd like to add, let's say, since I am done with this one, I'll just go ahead and maybe delete it, right? Which is learn Python. I'm going to send that. It says success true. If we just try to refresh. And there we go. Now we can really see that learn Python to do. And with that, I think we have completed this part as well, where we have just added all 4 CRUD operations, right? So we can get all of our to-dos, where we just say collection.find and pass an empty filter so that we could get all of them under this cursor, and we just loop through it and append it to the to-dos, this array or the slice that we have created. Then we just return it as a response. We can create one with the error handling, and we can update one with our filters, and then the update field that we'd like to update, and then we can delete one. So here we can see it is actually pretty easy to build an API with it if you know the basics. And here, this is something really important to keep in mind, that you would like to omit the empty values for IDs. Otherwise, it's going to be that object ID of value, let's 000, that we have seen just a couple of minutes ago. And here is how we can like connect our database, and we're using this defer keyword to be able to disconnect once this surrounding function completes. So I think that's gonna be it for this section. And next, we would like to build the front end and connect to this application from that React app. So instead of using Postman, we're going to use that React application. So I'll just go ahead and just add all my changes to the staging area and just put a commit. And we have some build errors. Let's see. So for some reason, this is not being ignored. Let's go ahead into the git ignore, and maybe I'll just say logs, and I'll just say .log. And with that, now that should be, if we just put it like that, that should be ignored. We just say, we just said ignore that, any file that ends with log. Okay, so these are the changes that we have done. This is the main file. You could take a look in the commit history. I'll just add my changes. So this is my commit message, second section completed, where we just store our data in MongoDB. I'll just commit the changes, and I'll see you in the next section. Okay, so in this section, let's go ahead and create our React application. For this, I'll just open up my terminal, and I'll just say make directory called client. There we go, it has been created, and let's cd into that. And now I would like to create a React application, which I'll say npm create feed at latest, and I'll just say that dot, so that it's gonna put that in the current directory, which is gonna be client. If we press enter, that is gonna ask us two different questions, where we would like to go with React and TypeScript. So I'll just select React with TypeScript. Now it says run npm install, because you got a bunch of different like in the package.json you have a bunch of different dependencies. You would like to install that so that you could get your not modules folder. So that's gonna go ahead and grab all of them. Now while it completes we're going to be using ChakraUI. So let's go ahead and say ChakraUI and take a look at the documentation. So this is a component library which is accessible for React, and we'd like to use it just to speed up the process. And this is how we would use it. Let's first copy this command. We would like to paste it into the client directory, right? I'll just paste that, and that's going to give us the dependencies that we need. And let's go with the framework guide of Vite. So we have got this script, and it tells us to wrap our application with the Chakra provider. I'll just go ahead, copy it, and in my main.tsx, right, I'll just wrap it like this. And let's get the Chakra provider. So it doesn't give me for some reason, which is going to be this one. And by the way, while we're here, let's go ahead and delete the assets, delete the app.css, and in the app.tsx, let's just say p tag, or maybe a button that says hello, and this button is going to be coming from Chakra. So there we can see. Let's delete this app.css, Vite logo, and everything. Okay, with that, let's go ahead and also install a package called React-icons. We're going to be using them for the icons, and with that, I think we should be able to find with ChakraUI. Let's say npm run dev to be able to start our development server, which is going to be at this port. I'll just control click to it. It's going to open this localhost 5073. And there we go. Now we have this button that says hello. In your case, that might be a light mode. Here it is dark mode for me, but we're going to implement that so that we could switch from dark to light and light to dark. And also, this is the demo application that we're gonna build. So here we're gonna have this kind of navbar where we could go from light mode to dark mode. And here, let's just start with the navbar. So the very first thing that I'll be doing is to go into the app.tsx, and I'm just gonna wrap everything with a stack, which is coming from ChakraUI. And I'll say height is gonna be 100 VH, which is the entire screen. So we're gonna have a navbar. We're gonna create this component, and we're gonna wrap rest of our application in a container where we'll have a to-do form and then a to-do list. So let's take a look at the end result. We have a navbar, and the rest of our application is in a container, which just centers that here, right? So in the middle of the screen, we have a to-do form and then a to-do list, and each of them are going to be a to-do item, right? So this is a to-do item with check mark and delete button. And when you say stack, that's going to just put every child on vertical direction. So we have navbar at the top, and below that to-do form, and then just the to-do list. So let's start with the navbar, and for this we're going to be using these images. And for that, you need to visit the GitHub repo, and under the public folder you're going to see a couple of different files. So just grab them and paste it into this folder. So I just copied all of them, and I will just paste it into this file where we just have this explode.png, go.png, this golang for the favicon, and we have the react.png. And we'd like to use that in the navbar. So first, let's comment this out and visit the navbar component, which we don't have. So let's create the components folder, components, and we'd like to have the navbar.tsx. So here our focus is not really the UI design. So I'll just go ahead and copy and paste this code, which is pretty basic, and I'll just walk you through that. And you can find this code in this GitHub repo in the navbar.tsx. So we're never going to change this file later. So you could just copy that and paste it. So here we have a container with maximum width of 900 pixels, and we have a left side, right, which is going to be, let's see, it's going to be this left hand side with 3 icons with a plus and equal sign. And on the right hand side, we're going to have daily tasks with this kind of like toggle switch where we can go into light and dark mode. And here we just say background of this box is gonna depending on the color mode. If you are in the light mode, this is gonna be that color, and if you are in the dark mode, we're gonna be using this color. And we're getting this hook from ChakraUI where we have the color mode as well as toggle color mode function. When we click that, we're gonna change the color mode as well as the icon. So let's just save that, import it, and delete this, and let's use it. So this is our application. There we can see it is here. We can switch that mode, but for some reason it is not being centered. And let's see why this is the case. First, I'll go into the dark mode, and it is because of this index.css. We have this additional styles that came with Vite. So if we delete everything in this file, and if we just refresh, there we can see it just works fine, just like in the demo application. So here you can see it is almost exactly the same, where we just make this icon a little bit larger. And the very next thing that we'd like to add is gonna be this this to-do form where we just have an input as well as an icon. So if you want to learn more about this dark and light mode, you could always take a look at the documentation where you would go into the color mode, and they have just example API. So let's say dark mode, and like if you visit use color mode, they're gonna just show you how you can make this toggle light and dark, and this is the exact same thing that I'm using because I just take that from the documentation. So there isn't anything complex in this file, and I'm not going to explain that. It is just CSS styles. So you would just grab that and paste it into this file from the GitHub repo. And the next thing that we'd like to add is going to be this to-do form. I'll just uncomment this and create this to-do form component. So here I'll just say RAFCE, and now we could really type this component from scratch. And again, there is not anything complex, so I don't really want to waste time on like the UI. I'll just go ahead and paste it. And if you want to get this code, I'll just put that at the very bottom of the file. I'll just say starter code because we will change this code in the incoming minutes. And I want you to have this starter code while you're following along, okay? So you would get this kind of code and paste it and just follow along with the tutorial. So here we have a state where we keep track of the to-do, and we are keeping track of that with this onChange, and this input is going to be focused by default when you refresh the page, and when you click to a button, it's going to make it scale, so it's going to shrink that. And if we are loading, we're going to show a spinner of size XML, and everything is coming from ChakraUI, and we have React icons if you want to take a look at that as well. And when you submit this form, we're going to just call this function which takes the event, and this is the type of it that is coming from TypeScript, which is a form event, and we'll just prevent the default so that it doesn't refresh the page, and it's going to say to do added. Later we're going to add this functionality so that we could actually interact with our MongoDB database. Let's save that, and we have an error, or it's just a warning. It says you are not using that, but we'll use that later. Okay, let's save and just see that in action. Here we go. We have this input and the button. If you refresh the page, this is gonna focus itself by default because we have this line of code. And when we just add anything into here, it's gonna say to do added with this alert. So that's gonna be to do form component. And if you really want to see the like the UI design, just pause the video, take a look at it from the starter code. Basically, we have a form and we have a flex. On the left hand side, we have the input, and on the right, we have the button. If it is pending, let's just make this to be true. We're gonna have this loading state into it, but else if it is false, we're gonna see this plus icon. And next, we would like to build the to-do list component so that we could just see this data. I'll go ahead and create that one, to-do list.tsx, and in to-do list, we're gonna have to-do item.tsx. So here I'll just again get the starter code, paste it twice so that you could use it as well. And again, this is pretty simple file. I'll just paste that and I'll paste it again, comment this out, just like here, and I'll just say starter code. So you would copy and paste that part. And basically we have fake data, right? 3 different to-dos: buy groceries, walk the dog, do laundry, and cook dinner. 2 of them are completed and 2 of them are not. So I'll just shrink this to-dos, and we have a loading state, and we are importing the to-do item for each to-do, right? So I'll just go ahead and add this to-do item as well. And this is going to be the very last thing that we will copy and paste. So about 40 lines of code, and I will paste it again. Starter code, for those of you guys that want to follow along, right? Okay, so these are just styles. That's why I don't really want to waste too much time on it. And okay, if we save this file and this one, this is taking a to-do as a prop, and we're just giving that type with TypeScript. And for each to-do, we'll just check if it is completed, then it's going to take this green 200 color, but else that's going to be yellow 100. And we'll just check. So we're going to give this line through if it is completed, right? So just like that. If it is not, it's going to have this normal text. And if it is completed, it's going to have this done badge. And if it is not, it's going to show this in progress, right? So this is not completed and this is completed. Then on the very right hand side, we have check mark and then the delete or the trash icon. So that's going to be it. Let's save and see that in action in our application. First, we need to go into this component and import it just like this. It's going to refresh, and there we go. So here we have a loading spinner is because we have this loading state is true, and we just check if it is loading, just show a spinner of size X large. And let's say by default that's going to be false. And there we go. So this is the today's task, where we have just a couple of them, and all of them are fake data. And also let's go ahead and update this title to have this kind of a gradient. And for that, we could check the documentation. Let's say gradient, and here you can see they are using it on the text. And I'll just give you this bg gradient linear to left, right? You just put the right value and then the left one. So if we just put something like maybe blue, it's gonna go, okay, so it goes to left. So that's gonna be the right value, and this is gonna be the left value, which is this pink color. Starting from right with blue, it's gonna go to the left with this pink color. And let me just give you the styles to be able to get this kind of linear gradient. So here, let's just go ahead into the to-do list where we have this text. I'll just give these styles. Starting from this color to this one, and bg clip of text, so that we can get this end result. Now everything works fine. It is time to actually add this functionality and grab these data from the database. And for that, we'll be using TanStack, also known as React Query. So if you visit TanStack Query, here you can see the entire documentation, and basically we'll like to use this as our data fetching solution. And here you can see the motivation behind it, and like it just gives you a lot of different things out of the box that you could use. Things like caching, deduping, updating out of date data in the background, and lots of other things. And I think it's such a great library to use. And at the end of the day, you would like to use it in your so to say production ready applications, because that's going to give you lots of different functionalities that you don't really want to reinvent. So the very first thing that we would like to do is just install it. So let's take a look at from the documentation. If we go into the installation, we should be able to see this command, right? I will copy it and paste it in my terminal, and just make sure it is under the client. So I'll just paste that and install it. And while it installs in the background, let's go ahead into the quick start. You could take a look at it, how they're going to set it up, or you could just trust me and see my guide. So this is something, again, I took from documentation, where you'd like to create a query client and import it from our package. and we'd like to wrap our application with it so that we could use this query client in our application. And you'll see what that is going to provide, right? So I'll just say query client provider and then just wrap my entire application with it. So let's import that one as well. Okay, with that, now we should be able to send requests to our database or our backend, right? So we're gonna go into let's start with, I think, to-do list, where we can just fetch all the to-dos that we have in the database. And before we start doing that, let's just create a type. So export type, let's say to-do, and we'll just say each to-do is gonna have this underscore ID field, type of number, body of string, and then completed is gonna be Boolean. And in the to-do item, when we say we're getting this to-do, let's say the type is going to be this to-do that we are exporting from this file. Okay, and I think we could delete this to-dos now, and instead we're just going to fetch that. Okay, so instead of this fake data, let's try to fetch it. So when you want to fetch some data in React Query, you would use query hook, okay, which is gonna take the first argument as this object, and we're gonna pass the query key, and you'll see what that is going to do in a second. But basically this is like an identifier for this query, and when we want to refetch data for this one, we're just gonna say fetch the query that has this query key of to-dos, and that's going to do it. So again, you'll just see that in action in a couple of minutes. Let's say we're gonna have the query function where we'll have try and catch. In the try, we'll say const res await fetch, where our endpoint was, let's say, http localhost 5000/API/todos, and we're gonna get a response, I mean a data back, and we could just say if response is not okay, then just throw this data.message. That's not gonna be data.message, but it's gonna be error because this is what we are returning from the backend, right? And in the catch, we could maybe just console log the error. And then here I'll just say return the data, and if you don't have anything, then just return an empty array. Here we need to, so this is going to give us a value, let's say const data, which is the to-dos. I'll just rename it to be to-dos, so just to make our code a little bit more readable. And instead of this fake use state, I'll just say is loading is going to be dynamic. And here now it just want us to put some value, right? So this is a generic. Here we'll just say this is going to return us a to-do, an array of to-dos. So just like that, let's delete this one. In here, so for some reason it says property data does not exist on type string. So let's see why this is the case. So we say use query, we just get that not from ChakraUI, but that should be coming from the TanStack Query. So just like that, it should fix it, where we just fetch our to-dos from the backend, and if it is not okay, we'll just throw that, console log it, and otherwise we'll just say return the data. But if we just save it like that, we're gonna get a course error, right? Let's just see in the console. Let me just zoom in a little bit. Okay, refresh. Oh, okay, so we don't even have our server is up and running. So I'll just kill this client and open up a new one, and I'll just say error. And just make sure you're not in the client directory, but in the root. So there you go. Now it says it is watching those changes, but I don't think if it is correct, because we said that exclude the client folder. So whenever you change something here, it is not going to restart the server, but I just don't know why it says watching. And here we have connected to MongoDB Atlas. Let's send a request. We got the course error where it just says you cannot send a request from this URL to localhost 5000. And to be able to fix it, let's go ahead and just add the course to our Go server. So in main.go, we would like to add course after maybe before these requests. So here I'll just say app.use, and we'll just say course, and make sure you import it from Fiber middleware, and I'll just say new. We would like to say course.config, and it's gonna take this kind of like an object where we'll just say allow origins of, let's say, HTTP localhost of 5173, which is gonna be our front-end application, and we'll just say allow headers to be origin content type, and make sure you put a dash and then the accept. So if you save that now, it should hopefully restart our server, and we should be able to fetch data. Let's just send again. So I think it just tries to restart. Let's just see. Okay, it is up and running. And if we just send that, there we go. Now we have learn Go and learn React, which is in our database, and they are not completed. That's why we just see that as this kind of in progress. And here we just say you need to add a key. Let's kill this one. And in the to-do list, we're gonna add this underscore ID. So here we already have it. Why do we get that? So under the to-do list, it says they should have a unique key prop, and it is coming from line 56. So that should normally work, but for now, let's just say IDX, and we just put the index just like that. And if we just refresh, we don't have that error, and we just fetch our data. So the very nice thing that I would like to implement is when I click to that, I just want to mark it as completed. Let's go into the to-do item, right? When I click to this check circle, so I'll just say on click, let's just say update to-do function. And before we write that, let me just quickly explain what we have done here. Basically, whenever we render this to-do list, we are calling this use query, which is going to send a fetch request to our endpoint, and it's going to give us the data back, which we called it as to-dos, and we are mapping it with each to-do item, and we pass this to-do into that component, and we are just using it in here, right? And now we'd like to just update a to-do, and for that we'll be using mutation hook. So here I'll just go ahead and say use mutation, which is coming from TanStack, and here this is going to return us a mutate function, right? So let's say mutate, and I'll just rename it to be update to do, and it's going to give us is pending state, and I'll just call it as is updating, just to make my code a little bit more readable. And here this is going to take again an object where we could give a mutation key. So mutation key, that's going to be, let's say, update to do, and the most important thing is to have this mutation function, which is going to be async, and we'll say if to do is completed, then we'll just say return out of this function with this alert, where we'll just say let's say not task, but let's say to do is already completed, and we're gonna have the try catch. So try catch, and in the try we're gonna just send a request to our endpoint. So instead of always typing this localhost 5000, what I'll be doing is to create a base URL, and for that let's go into the app.tsx, and I'll say export const base underscore URL, which is going to be on this port /API. Okay, so instead of using always this value, I'll just use this constant, and let's save it like that, and I'll just put it like this, right? This is my base URL, which ends with /API, and I'll just say /todos and then the to-do ID. This is the to-do that I would like to mark as completed. Then I'll say my method is going to be patch, and headers is going to be content type of application JSON, and I think we don't even need to pass it because it is going to update it, right? It's going to make that completed field to be true, and I'll say const data res.json, and if response is not okay, just maybe throw an error and return the data otherwise. Here we could just say console log the error itself, and let's save. So while we're updating, we could show some kind of like loading state, just like in the demo application. So if I clicked that, here you can see I have that loading spinner for a second. And let's go ahead and add it. Here I will cut that. I'll say if it is not pending, or I'm sorry, if it is not updating, this is how we have called it, then we would like to show this. But else, if it is updating, then I'll just say give me this spinner from ChakraUI, and let's say size is going to be small. Okay, so we have some kind of like warning from TypeScript. Let's just say, just call it like that. Okay, instead of giving a reference, we'll just say the callback function is going to be this update to do when you click to this box. Let's see this in action. Here I'll just say learn goal is completed. So it says invalid to do ID. And let's see why this is the case. So to do underscore ID is not working for some reason. Let's say console.log the to do and just see that in console. Okay, so it has the ID field, and I think we forgot to update it in the like main.go. I'll just say main.go. Here this should be called as underscore ID, and this is something I forgot, so I just realized. Sorry about that. Save it. It's going to restart our server, and let's just wait for a second. So I'll just go ahead and refresh it. Okay, let's just refresh it again until our server is up and running. There we go. Now we have the underscore ID field, and if I click to that, there we go. It has been updated, but we need to refresh it to be able to see it. Here you can see it just says now this has been completed. And so let's implement this. When we click to that, it should immediately refetch the new state. So we don't really need to refresh the page to be able to see it. And this is where that query key is gonna come into play. So we will say, once you have completed this successfully, I'll say on success, then you would like to run this function where you would like to invalidate some queries. So I know this looks a bit weird, but just bear with me. We'll say query client and get that from this hook. Okay, so we would like to just refetch some queries. I'll say query client dot invalidate queries, and the one that we would like to update or invalidate, first just pass an empty object, and we'll say query key is gonna be this array to-dos. Okay, so we had this query key in this to-do list when we tried to fetch all of our to-dos, right? This is our query key, and when we say once you update it, just try to refetch this data. Okay, so let's try to see that. I'll just refresh, and if I clicked this, it's going to update, and there you go, because it refetched it immediately once this is done successfully. And the other thing we'd like to implement is to create a to-do. Let's for that go into the to-do form, and before that, instead of passing this index, right, I'll just delete that and I'll put to-do dot underscore ID, and now it should work because this is something that we have fixed in main.go file. I'll go into the to-do form, and so we are storing this when we type into the input, and when we submit this form, we are calling this function, which should actually create a to-do with the help of use mutation. So I'll just delete this function, and I'll actually get that from the use mutation, right? And make sure you import that from TanStack Query. And I'll say const, this is going to give me a mutate function, which I would like to call it as create to do. So this is how we would rename it. And then is pending state, where I would like to call it as maybe is creating, or we could just leave it is pending in this case. It is just preference, but I would always like to go with some kind of a custom name so that I could just know what is going on. is creating, just like that. And here we'd like to pass maybe a mutation key just in case we use it, and then a mutation function, which is gonna take the event, right? Because this is a submit handler, and we'll just say e.prevent default so that it doesn't refresh the page. And then we are gonna have the try catch, and I'm not sure why this is not happy with us. So maybe we are not returning something. Let's see. Okay, let's just try to see how this will end up. In the try, we're gonna have const res await, again fetch the base URL, let's import it, and so /API/todos, we would like to just pass the method as well as the body of the to-do. I'll just say method is gonna be post, headers is gonna be content type, application JSON, and then stringify the body, which is this new to-do string. And we're gonna get data out of it, and then we'll just say if response is not okay, just say something went wrong or throw the error. And we'd like to say set new to do to be an empty string, is because here, let's take a look at the demo. I'll just say something here. Once I press to this button, it's going to create it, and now it is going to reset this field. So that's why we are using it. And eventually we'll just say return data. In the catch, we could just say throw new error, and here we're gonna have, after this, let's say on success. So I'll just put a comma, and on success, once we have created a to-do successfully, we would like to refetch all to-dos just like we have done previously. And for that, we need to get the query key, and I think we need to say this e will be so react dot form event. And now this should be happy with us. And let's say error is going to be type of any. Okay, so let's go ahead and say const, I'll just give a little bit spacing, query client, get that, and we're going to just refetch it. So I'll say query client invalidate queries. We would like to just refetch to-dos, and if there is an error, so on error, we'll just say alert, maybe error D message. And here this is coming from ESLint, so I'll just say quick fix. Okay, so we'll just disabling that. It's really annoying, but okay, for now let's just keep it like that. And when we in the loading state, let's say is creating, then show this spinner, but else show that plus icon. Okay, hopefully this should be our function. Let's test it out. I'll just say learn Python and send that. There we go. Now we have created that one, and as soon as that is being created, we just invalidate our to-do queries so that it could refetch that. And here you can just double check it. If you go here, I'll just clear everything, and I'll just say learn C++, and once I send it, it's going to first create that one. This is the post request, and then it is going to fetch it, right? So here we can see it is going to send a fetch request to API to-dos, which is going to be get method. And here this is the post where we can create the to-do. Now we can mark it as completed. And I think we didn't implement the delete function, and we're going to add that next. But if you were to just take a look at the code, pretty simple, right? Nothing complex going on. We're just preventing the default, sending a request with our to-do body, and we're just doing some kind of error handling, and then just return the data on success and on error cases. And let's go ahead and implement the delete to-do. That's going to be looking pretty similar to this function. We could probably make this a little bit more reusable, but I'll just go with the simpler approach, where I'll just type it again from scratch, just to make it kind of like beginner friendly. And feel free to optimize this code. So again, we're gonna have delete to do whenever we click to this box. Okay, I'll just get that, paste it. this is gonna be calling the delete to do function, and we'll say if it is not deleting, so here if it is not deleting state, then show the delete icon, but else we would like to just show this spinner just like this. And let's go ahead and implement our function. So here I think I'll just let the copilot do the magic, where we're gonna have a mutation key, a mutation function, just gonna be async. We are sending a fetch request to our base URL and the to do that we would like to delete. This is our method. We are doing some error handling and returning the data. And in the catch case, we're just console logging it. And let's save and let's just try to see in action. But before that, I think we need to add this on success case as well to be able to invalidate queries. Because if we don't add it, let's try to delete this one. It has been deleted, but I can only see that if I refresh. And to be able to fix it, we're gonna go ahead and add the on success. And let's just try to delete this one. There you go. They have all been deleted, and now we just see all tasks completed. And it's because in the to-do list, we just say that if it is not loading and if the length of to-dos is equal to 0, then just show this text with the image. So I think we have implemented almost everything to this application, right? We can create a to-do. Let's just say watch a Go tutorial and create that one. And let's say watch a React tutorial and add that one. Let's say do laundry and let's say buy groceries. So we have added all of them and we can mark them as done. We could delete them and just fetch all of them, right? And here we have the light and dark mode, and there you go. Now light mode looks pretty ugly. You can't really read this and it is not really accessible. So let's go ahead and fix it. And for that, I think I'll just go into the source. I'll create a folder called Chakra where I could put my theme into it. So I'll say theme.ts. So here, this is a file that you could learn more about in the documentation. So that's why I'll just go ahead and paste this code, which is about like 20 lines of code, where we have the initial color mode as being dark, and it's going to use the system color mode. And here we just say the background color on the light mode is going to be this one, and in the dark mode just keep the default one. So to be able to use this, we're going to go into the main.tsx. into the Chakra provider, we'll just say theme is going to be this theme that we'll just that we have just created, and it is not going to be coming from this one, but let's just see, it is going to be coming from this theme.ts file that we have just added. Let's save and see this in action. And now there we go, we have this kind of like a little bit more soft background. And if you don't like the way this looks, just feel free to update it. But with that, I think that's gonna be it for the client. Now we have this kind of like hard-coded variable, right? And it is actually fine, but when we go into the production and development, this should be dynamic, right? It's because when we deploy this application, we're gonna have the both backend and client in the same root. So let's say currently we have our backend in this URL, right? And we're gonna have the client under the same URL as well, because this is how we'll deploy that. And once we have at this, we are not gonna need any CORS handling as well, because both the backend and the client will be in the same URL, right? In the same domain. That's why I'll just go ahead and update this a little bit. So I'll say import.meta.env.mode. If it is equal to development, then this is going to be our URL. So let me just zoom out a little bit so that you could see the entire screen. And if we are in the production, then we'll just send whatever the domain of whatever the domain is /API. And I think this is going to be a little bit more clear once we add this main.go file, right? So here, first things first, we don't actually want to handle, let's see, where's that course kind of thing. So in production, we don't really want to have this because, as I said before, our client and backend will be served under the same domain. To be able to make that work, we need to make this client folder to be static. So after this port, I'll go ahead and I'll say if os, let's say os.get env environment, if this is equal to production, then we'd like to make the client folder to be our static assets so that we could run and show our React application. So I'll say app.static. When we hit this root route, we'll just show, let's say, this client, this folder, which is going to have our built optimized version of React application. And we'll just see that in a second. Okay, so when you send a request to API todos, in like all these endpoints, you're gonna actually call the handler functions, but any routes other than these is going to trigger this React application under the dist folder in client. And we don't have this environment variable, so for now let's go ahead and add it to be development. Okay, so that we are in development, and now we're gonna deploy in a couple of minutes, and it's gonna be production, so we're gonna make that to be static. And the other thing that we'd like to update is that we can't really load the .env file in production because we're not gonna have that file in the production environment, but instead we're gonna have environment variables that we will put from the dashboard. So we'll say if, again, os.get env, if it is equal to, let's say, env, let's say if it is not equal to production, then we would like to actually load the environment variables. So I'll just put a comment. So it is pretty self-explanatory, but let's just have this comment where we would like to load the env file if we are not in the production. Now let's save this one, and we're gonna go ahead, kill our maybe the server, and then for the client, let's kill this, and we're gonna say npm run build. And this is gonna create a dist folder, which is gonna be that optimized version of our React application. And something that I want to change while this happening, I'll just not ignore this dist folder, and I would like to have it in my GitHub repo so that when I push any change, it could take it and like just deploy my React application. So this is not really the best approach, but it is gonna work in our case, and I found this to be the easiest to work with Railway. So there we go. Now we have the dist folder, which is gonna hold the optimized build of our React application. Now if we just kill the client, we can just say air to be able to start our backend server. So here it is up and running. We're connected to MongoDB Atlas, and let's visit localhost 5000/API/todos. And there we go. Now we can see all of our to-dos that we have. Since we are not in the production, we can't really see the React application that we have, but now we are going to deploy that, and you'll see it is going to work. So let's go ahead and push this code to the GitHub so that we could deploy it. So here I am in my GitHub account where I'll just create a repo. I'll say React Go tutorial, and that was the module name that I have give at the beginning of the video. So tutorial, just like that. And let's say create the repo. I'll just make it private, and once I publish this video, that's going to be public, so you'll just see that to be public. And if you don't really want to go with private, then just select public. So I'll go with this option. I'll say create the repo, and now I'd like to just push an existing repo from the command line. So I'll just copy all these commands, and first I want to add my changes, right? So here we can see I have everything, and let's add them to the staging area, and just make sure you're not ignoring the dist folder. And I think I just forgot to update one thing. So in the index.html, let's just say let's just say Go, React, and TypeScript, where I'll just say for the favicon, I'll just put this golang.png. So golang dot, not svg but png. And once we have done that, we should cd into the client first, and let's say npm run build. Whenever you change something in the client, you need to run this to get the latest version of this dist folder. Okay, so let's just wait for it until it's been built again. So there you go, it has been added. Let's just add those to the staging area as well. So these are our changes. So stage all of them, and I'll just put a commit message. So this is my commit message, third section completed, and it is ready for deployment. I'll just commit that, and I'll just go into the root, and let's just copy this and paste it, which is going to push this local repo to the GitHub repo that I have. And if we just refresh, there we go. This is the application or the source code that we just have. And to be able to deploy this, we'll be using Railway. So head over to the railway.app, and if you don't have an account, create one for free, which is going to give you $5 that you could use as the trial plan. So I've been using, I think, over the last 1 week, and it just charged me 3 cents, which is pretty convenient. Let's go into the dashboard where we would like to just start a new project. So I'll just say new project, deploy from my GitHub repo, and this is the very last repo that I have just created, and it is private. So I'll just select that one, and I'll say deploy now. So here it's going to initialize it and try to deploy that. And while it's done, while it tries to deploy, we need to add a couple of different environment variables. So the first one is going to be env, and here we are in the production. Let's add that. The other one is going to be MongoDB underscore URI, right? We need to get that connection string and then just paste it so that we could connect to our database. So I'll copy that and paste it. Now we don't really want to put port because Railway doesn't really want you to put that port. It is going to figure it out himself, okay, or itself. Let's just deploy that. These are the changes that we have just made. env is production, and this is our connection string. So it's going to redeploy the latest change that you have done. Let's just wait, and hopefully it should deploy without any errors. And if we have, we'll just try to figure that out. So it just looks like the latest one is active. Now we could go into the, I think that should be settings. And for the deploy, maybe in the networking. So okay, we'll just say generate a domain for us. And if we just wait a little bit, it's going to give us this URL. Let's click to it. Okay, there is nothing here yet. Let's just wait a little bit, and then hopefully it should be up and running. So here I'm just keep refreshing, and it just says not found, but it should be up in a couple of minutes. And if you go into the deployments, like you could see the latest one has been removed, and this is the latest one that we have. And you could just see the deploy logs where it just says hello world connected to MongoDB Atlas, and this is the port that Railway just figured it out because we didn't pass into the variables. And I think if you put that, it's gonna not be really happy. So let's just refresh a couple of times, and there we go. So we have the loading state, it connected to our database. Let's just why don't we have anything? So for some reason it failed to fetch. Let's just refresh. Okay, so it says localhost 5000 API to-dos, which is not really the correct URL because we are not on localhost anymore. And there must be some bug in this app.tsx. So here we just say if the mode is development, then this is going to be our base URL, but else this is going to be, I think at some point we should be using this localhost value, maybe in our to-do list. Okay, there you go. I forgot to update this part, right? I'll just delete this, where I'll just say base URL and plus the to-dos. Okay, slash to-dos, just like that. But first we need to cd into the client and just say npm run build. And before that, I just also realized in the index.html, this should be golang, and here I just have a typo. So that's why it cannot really, oops, it is not this one. It cannot really get this favicon, and it just throws an error that says 404, this image is not found. So let's just update that, and let's say npm run build. Just gonna give us the new dist folder, right? So it's just gonna go ahead and update that. And once that is done, we could commit our changes. And here, these are the changes that we have done. Here we have kind of like ESLint warning. It is not really important, so just ignore that. And add all of them to the staging area. And I'll just say base URL bug fixed. Commit that and sync that up. So once you commit your changes, right, and push that, Railway will immediately see that and it's going to rebuild it. There you go, it says building, and it has just been 8 and 10 seconds. So just wait for this to complete, and once it is done, I'll just be right back. Okay, so there we go, it has just been uploaded. Let's go ahead and see, and there we go, we got the data, it is up and running. We should be able to get this favicon as well. I'll just keep refreshing, and for some reason it is in the cache, but it should update in a couple of minutes. Yeah, it should definitely update it because we have update that file. So let me just double check. If we go into the index.html, oh okay, I again still did the wrong one, so that should be golang, just like that. And you could put another commit, but I think I'll just leave it like that. So there is a typo, that's why it doesn't work. But if you go here, you could mark something as a done. It's going to update. You could delete it. You could delete everything basically, or just say add a new to do, just like that. We could make it done and delete that one as well. And as far as I know, this should be responsive as well, so it's gonna work on your phone completely fine up until like here, which is one of the smallest phones you could ever get. And with that, that's gonna be it for this video. If you want to see more tutorials like this, where we build full stack web apps with Go and React, let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.